Moscow, the heart of the Soviet Union. So vital to Russians, they call it simply the center. Leningrad, Peter the Great's window on Europe, called the youngest and least publicized of the world's most beautiful cities. International Video Network welcomes you on this video visit to Moscow and Leningrad, the crown jewels of Russia. The Soviet Union, the largest country in the world, sprawls across 2 continents, 11 time zones from west to east. But her greatest cities lie here in Europe, Leningrad in the north, a stone's throw from Scandinavia, and Moscow on the great Russian plain, the centerpiece of the nation in every respect. It was the great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin who wrote Moscow. How violently the name plucks at any Russian heart. For this is the focal point of the country. Government, religion, education, the very spirit of the Soviet Union makes its home in Moscow. 8 million people also live in the metropolis, about as many as in New York or London, but they're squeezed into an area only half London's size. It was Prince Yuri Dolgoruki who in the year 1147 first established a settlement here on a bluff overlooking the Moscow River. Despite being sacked and burned by the invading Tatars in the next century, Moscow soon became the seat of the Russian Orthodox Church, and by the 16th century had grown outwards into a thriving city, centered around the Kremlin, the headquarters of the Tsars. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with 600,000 troops. In a desperate attempt to keep Moscow out of Napoleon's hands, the defenders set fire to their own capital. For 3 days, Moscow burned. The Kremlin was badly damaged, and 2/3 of the city was razed. The city was threatened again during World War II. This time it was 75 Nazi divisions who laid siege. Government officials, children, and art treasures were evacuated as the Germans approached to within 10 miles. But for 6 months, the city held fast. In the end, the Battle of Moscow proved to be the Nazis' first major defeat of the war. Through the centuries, the heart of Moscow has always been the Kremlin, the seat of the government. A city within a city, surrounded by a wall 1.5 miles long and up to 20 feet wide. The Kremlin's 60 acres of palaces, museums, and churches make it Europe's most concentrated expression of the art, architecture, and history of a single nation. Russians go even further. One playwright wrote, "The earth, as we all know, begins at the Kremlin. It is our central point." The Kremlin's most conspicuous landmark is the bell tower of Ivan the Great. Built on the site of an old church nearly 500 years ago, the bell tower was, until World War II, Moscow's tallest building. Of the many magnificent churches in the Kremlin, the Cathedral of the Dormition is the largest and most important. All of Moscow's princes and tsars were crowned inside this cathedral beginning in the late 1400s. The interior is adorned with exquisite frescoes and icons, the abiding images of the Russian saints. Many of the church's treasures were carried off by Napoleon, the icons burned as firewood. But in his retreat from the city, Napoleon jettisoned this precious booty, and much of it has been restored to the cathedral. Next door, built at almost the same time, are the 9 golden domes of the Cathedral of the Annunciation. Erected by Ivan III on the foundations of earlier churches, this became the private chapel of the Tsars. Inside is an altar screen, or iconostasis, thought to be one of the most remarkable pieces of religious art anywhere in the world. In these paintings, sacred figures are suffused with a humanity rarely seen in Western devotional art. Completing this trinity of cathedrals in the Kremlin is the Cathedral of the Archangel, built in the style of the Italian Renaissance in 1505. Named in honor of the Archangel Michael, protector of princes, the cathedral is fittingly the burial place of all of Moscow's early Tsars. Here, entire dynasties are entombed, both in glory and in shame, from Ivan the Great to Ivan the Terrible, to his son, Ivan Ivanovich, murdered by his father in a fit of blind rage. The successor to Ivan the Terrible had this enormous cannon cast to defend the Kremlin wall, too enormous, in fact, ever to be fired. Not to be outdone, the Empress Anna built herself the world's largest bell, 15 times heavier than Big Ben. Here, too, the empire's reach exceeded its grasp. The bell cracked before it was ever rung. The Kremlin is also the site of several of Moscow's finest museums. Inside the group of buildings known as the Patriarchal Palace stands a set of galleries dedicated to preserving the best examples of 17th century Russian craftsmanship. The strong points of the museum are the precious metals, silver and gold plate, created for the aristocratic households of Moscow. But all of the workmanship, even in wood and ceramic, is evidence of the superior skills of the artisans who worked for the noble families. The ultimate treasure house, however, is the Armory Palace, one of the oldest and richest museums in Russia. Here are housed 4 centuries of imperial possessions, many of them created in the Kremlin workshops. Diamond-studded sabers, armor of every imaginable decorative style and military purpose, forged in the smithies of Europe and presented as gifts to the Tsars. One entire room is devoted to the splendid carriages of the 18th century. In today's Kremlin, life for an official is somewhat more austere. But prestige is still measured in the way one gets around Moscow. The more influential the official, the newer and more luxurious will be his chauffeur-driven black limousine. Even in a system based on equal access to wealth, the status symbol is alive and well. Just outside of the Kremlin lies Red Square, which in medieval times was an enormous marketplace. Today, the square is the setting for the Soviet Union's most splendid pageantry, the May Day Parade and the anniversary of the Russian Revolution, celebrated each October. Red Square has always been a central gathering place, even in the days of the Tsars. In fact, its name in Old Slavonic actually means main square, or beautiful square. On this circular stone platform, called the Lobnoye Mesto, imperial edicts were read aloud, and rebels and revolutionaries put to death before the public. Perhaps the single most famous site in Moscow is St. Basil's Cathedral, with its 9 fantastically carved domes, no two alike. On seeing it for the first time, one traveler wrote, "Horizontally and vertically, towers and domes, spires, cones, onions, crenellations filled the whole view. It might have been the invention of Dante, arrived in a Russian heaven." Legend has it that Ivan the Terrible had his architect's eyes gouged out after they completed the cathedral, so that they could never outdo this masterpiece. An apocryphal story, but it is part of the cathedral's mystery. the quality which draws visitors towards it like a magnet.
I'm lucky to be here. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to see this. It's a great experience.
It's not at all what we expected. It's completely different because we've studied the Soviet Union in our classes, and then to come here and see everything that you've studied, it's so completely different. You have all of these ideas in your classrooms, but then to come here and see everything and see Red Square and see the Kremlin, and it makes everything so real.
It's overwhelming too because it's really beautiful. I guess a lot of people don't realize what a beautiful country it really is.
Also in Red Square is the tomb of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, founder of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and still revered as the father of the revolution. The tomb, built of black granite 6 years after his death, is the scene of a solemn changing of the guard every hour of every day. Thousands of visitors line up each day to pay homage to his embalmed remains, which are enclosed in a glass within the mausoleum. They circle the casket in silence, sometimes in awe, not allowed to photograph or even pause before it lest they hold up the line. But so large does Lenin loom over the history of the world that some have called this the most religious experience in the modern-day Soviet Union. Buried inside the nearby Kremlin wall are the ashes of the Soviet Union's most renowned statesmen, including Joseph Stalin. At the tomb of the unknown soldier, it's a Moscow tradition for newlyweds to lay flowers on their wedding day. That's just one sign of the reverence, whether heartfelt or merely dutiful, which Soviets show for their great national symbols, particularly for Lenin and the Revolution of 1917. It was in October of that year that Lenin and the Bolshevik Party led a workers' uprising throughout the country. Bloody street battles broke out, and eventually the Bolsheviks overthrew the regime in St. Petersburg and established the world's first full-fledged socialist government, moving the capital back to Moscow. The first years of the Soviet Union were marred by civil war and hardship, and Lenin himself was a strong advocate of violence as a key to social change. But he was also the architect of the greatest reforms the country had known since the liberation of the serfs in the 19th century, and his presence can be felt all over the capital. The Lenin Museum contains a huge collection of his papers and memorabilia, including a replica of his Kremlin study, complete with pencil and notebook. There are artifacts from his early life. One can even see the communist leader's own Rolls-Royce, although he himself never drove it, preferring a bicycle. Honoring his memory, too, is the huge Lenin Library. This enormous complex of 5 buildings, containing more than 30 million volumes, is the largest library in Europe and one of the great scholarly resources of the world. Lenin even graces the facade of Moscow's renowned department store, named GUM. This Victorian arcade attracts 350,000 shoppers every day, more than 85 million a year. Despite consumer showplaces like GUM, shopping can be a challenge in the USSR. Although Russian consumers have saved up the equivalent of about $50 billion, there is often little for them to spend their money on. Shortages of all types of goods, from modern conveniences to items as basic as sugar and meat, are common. Long lines form whenever sausage, rice, coffee, or any scarce item suddenly becomes available. The Muscovites' plight isn't helped by the daily influx of 2.5 million shoppers who flock into the city from surrounding areas to stock up on available goods, causing even further shortages.
Мы рассчитываем на поддержку крестьянства, ибо политика партии – это его политика.
But Soviet leader President Gorbachev is trying to change all that. Under his restructuring of the Soviet economy, which he terms perestroika, 2 million people are now employed in cooperatives and private businesses in the USSR. For the shopper, that means new private markets where farmers sell their own goods directly to the consumer. One can find cooperative cafes and bazaars all over Moscow, and the variety of goods is always matched by the variety of Moscow's people. Even though it is located in the heart of the Republic of Russia, Moscow is home to large numbers of ethnic minorities: Uzbeks, Turks, Muslims, Gypsies, Jews. In fact, Soviet citizens speak over 70 languages besides Russian, and illiteracy, even among non-Russian speakers, has been nearly absent in the Soviet Union for 40 years. One of Moscow's most popular strolling districts is Arbat Square, where a pedestrian mall has been established in a charming 18th century quarter of the city. In fact, Arbat is considered a Russian version of Greenwich Village, and a passerby can enjoy Soviet street life on a sunny afternoon. All of the artists on the street might put one in mind of Paris's Montmartre district. These seemingly Western scenes are taking place in the shadow of the headquarters of the KGB, the Soviet secret police. Not long ago, visitors weren't permitted even to photograph the building, let alone interview a policeman about some of Moscow's problems.
Водителей скоростного режима по Москве, которые нарушают скоростной режим, вообще очень много. Водители, особенно водители такси, которые развозят людей на вокзалы, аэропорты, они в основном по черте города превышают скорость. И мы их часто останавливаем. В основном они четко подчиняются, значит, жестам инспектора и останавливаются. Хотя знают, что за это несут наказание. Штраф от 3 до 20 рублей за первое нарушение. Если нарушение идет повторное, значит, от 5 до 20 рублей, вплоть, значит, в это время изымается талон предупреждения. При, значит, третьем нарушении изымается водительское удостоверение, и водитель лишается права управления на полгода и до полгода.
Another lively district is Gorky Street, which locals have nicknamed Broadway. Sure enough, the billboards here have a certain Times Square feeling to them. It's easy to get around Moscow by subway. A 5-kopeck coin, worth about 10 cents, buys unlimited mileage on the extensive system. In fact, the metro stations themselves are worth a visit. In the 1930s, the USSR, like the rest of the world, was suffering a terrible economic depression. In an attempt to boost the morale of the capital, Joseph Stalin ordered that a new subway system be built as a showcase of civic splendor. Each station was built in a unique and often extravagant architectural style, many celebrating the virtues of the common worker. The result is an underground network of small palaces, which also functions as an efficient mass transit system. The man who oversaw their construction was later well rewarded. His name? Nikita Khrushchev. The Pushkinskaya metro station opens onto a small public park presided over by a statue of the man considered the founder of Russian literature, the poet Alexander Pushkin. For his contribution to the Russian language, Pushkin is as important as Goethe was to German and Shakespeare to English. One of the best ways to meet the poets of tomorrow is to spend some time in Gorky Park, one of Moscow's favorite spots to relax and play.
Жена напялила платок, и мы пошли с ней на каток. Жена напялила коньки, и мы стоим как дураки.
These high school students are celebrating their graduation with a cruise down the Moscow River.
А все катаются вперед-назад, а все катаются вперед-назад, а все катаются вперед-назад. Я почему-то был не рад. Вот навернулся пионер, на пионера инженер, на инженер тракторист, на тракторист пианист. А все катаются вперед-назад, а все катаются вперед-назад, а все катаются вперед-назад. Я почему-то был не рад.
Street musicians and amateur dance troupes from all over Russia make strolling through Moscow's parks a pleasant adventure. North of the city is the sprawling exhibition of economic achievement of the USSR, which started as a sort of county fair in 1939 and has become a vast showplace of regional and national accomplishments. The highlight is the space exhibition, containing tributes to the Soviet Union's pioneering work in space exploration. Yuri Gagarin, in 1961, became the first man in space, making one orbit around the Earth in the Vostok 1. Coming just 4 years after Sputnik, the very first space probe, Gagarin's flight confirmed the Soviet Union's leadership role in space exploration. To this day, he is a hero of Soviet youth. The exhibition documents the many milestones achieved by other cosmonauts, displaying satellites and orbiters recovered from space, as well as exhibits about space travel and weightlessness. There is even a tribute to joint US-Soviet space projects, where Glasnost reaches into new frontiers. While the Soviet Union is officially an atheist state, and Lenin himself called religion a cheap kind of vodka, the attitude toward the practice of religion is relaxing a bit. Gone are the days under Stalin when 10,000 churches were closed down. Today, visitors can still enjoy the serenity of the Yelakovsky Cathedral, the headquarters of the Russian Orthodox Church. This monument showing General Kutuzov and his deputies in defense of Moscow is located in the western suburb of Filimatsilovo, just outside a cylindrical building commemorating a turning point in the war against Napoleon. Inside is an enormous mural, 380 feet long and 50 feet high, depicting the battle in which tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides lost their lives. Not long afterwards, as Moscow burned, Napoleon abandoned his siege. The mural is unusually effective because it is actually a diorama combining a painted background with three-dimensional scenery in the foreground. Viewers feel as though they have stepped directly into the scene of battle. A triumphal arch was erected commemorating the Russian victory as well. Since the Tsar's army foiled Napoleon's attempts to carry away Moscow's artistic heritage, the city retains possession of its most prized artworks. Here at the Tretyakov Gallery, thousands of pieces of art are displayed, making it one of the largest museums in the world. A visitor would have to walk 50 miles of hallways to view all the works, which range from masterpieces of the Middle Ages all the way to socialist realism. Highlights include works by Repin, Ivanov, and Rublev, the great icon painter. In contrast, the Pushkin Museum houses works of Western European cultures, including many galleries of classical and Renaissance painting and sculpture. The museum is also rich in later Dutch and French painting. One European art form on which the Russians have had an incalculable influence is the ballet. This is the Bolshoi Theatre, a stately neoclassical building that is home to both the Bolshoi Opera and the world-renowned Bolshoi Ballet. The dance company performs to sold-out houses every night. Lucky foreign visitors can obtain tickets on a first-come, first-served basis to see performances by Vasilyev, Gordeev, and Semenyaka. The great tradition of Russian experimental theater continues at the Taganka. The theater is renowned throughout Russia and has a great legacy as a source of intellectual debate. Rock music is becoming more and more prominent in the city. In fact, music of every variety can be heard somewhere in Moscow. Finally, no tour of Moscow nightlife is complete without a visit to the incomparable Moscow Circus. Here the evening begins as a floor show, later the ring transforms into a skating rink, and the finale is choreographed as a water ballet. Like the city itself, the Moscow Circus is full of variety, surprise, and true Russian spirit. If Moscow is the heart and soul of Mother Russia, then Leningrad is her cultural capital, a city of art and music, of lively people and rich history. Here on the shore of the Baltic Sea, 2/3 of the way to the North Pole, a great city was built by decree. It was Peter the Great, the first Tsar to visit Western Europe, who in 1703 ordered that a new capital be built to rival the great cities of Europe. St. Petersburg was to be Russia's window on the West. Peter invited foreign architects to design a stately city of Baroque palaces, canals, parks, and fountains. So much building material was needed that erecting stone buildings anywhere else in Russia was forbidden. By 1712, the city was ready, and it reigned as Russia's capital for 2 centuries, until Lenin turned his back on Europe and returned the capital to Moscow. Ironically, St. Petersburg now bears his name. Leningrad today, with its 5 million residents, still boasts of being the Soviet Union's most sophisticated city. The lifeblood of Leningrad is the broad river Neva, which courses in and around the city and the islands on which it was built. Hundreds of bridges, grand and simple, link the city together, giving it the feel of Amsterdam or Venice. Dominating the river is the Peter and Paul Fortress, the first major construction of Peter the Great's new city. This stronghold controlled river navigation as a military garrison, and later held in its dungeons many famous revolutionaries, including Leon Trotsky. Peter the Great's own son, Prince Alexis, was held here before being tortured to death in 1717 by order of his father. Within the walls of the fortress is the Scandinavian-style Peter and Paul Cathedral. Peter the Great commanded that its slender gilt spire should dwarf every other church in Russia. His order was obeyed. He's buried inside the cathedral, along with most of his successors, including Catherine the Great. Most of Leningrad's Tsars lived and ruled in Palace Square, an extraordinary ensemble of Baroque buildings which rival the Vatican St. Peter's Square in their harmony of architecture and open space. Towering over the square is the Alexander Column, the tallest granite monolith in the world. On the north is the Winter Palace, residence of the last 6 Tsars. From Catherine the Great to the last of the Romanovs, the Winter Palace was the headquarters of the Russian Empire, the showplace for all the possessions of the imperial family. The palace contains 1,050 rooms, 1,886 doors, and 1,945 windows. Its principal cornice is more than a mile long. This half-European, half-Russian masterpiece contains the Hermitage Museum, a collection of more than 2 million items displayed in its halls. Here the accumulated wealth of the Tsars is truly staggering. Among the galleries are 141 rooms devoted just to Western European art, including works by Leonardo da Vinci, El Greco, Velázquez, and Rembrandt. Here, too, are private collections confiscated after the revolution. One Moscow merchant lost 27 Matisses and 31 Picassos. But the Hermitage owes its splendid holdings primarily to its first great collector, the Empress Catherine the Great. During her 34 years on the Russian throne in the late 1700s, she fully embraced Western European society. Catherine cultivated friendships with French intellectuals like Voltaire and Diderot, adopted French as her court language, and amassed storerooms full of European art. It was Catherine who first used this building as a gallery for her rapidly expanding collection. Each successive generation added to the Hermitage building as the treasury of artworks expanded. Near the Winter Palace stands the Admiralty Tower, since the early 19th century the symbol of Leningrad. Here the Tsarist forces made their last desperate attempt to stave off the revolution. Pushkin memorialized the tower when he wrote, "When in my room I write or read, no lamp or candle do I need. In streets deserted mansions sleep, and o'er their clearly etched outlines the Admiralty needle shines." Nearby is St. Isaac's Cathedral, another distinctive feature of the Leningrad skyline and one of the world's largest churches. Nearly 500,000 workmen labored 40 years to complete the cathedral, and many died from inhaling poisonous fumes while plating the enormous golden dome, covered with more than 200 pounds of gold. Inside the dome hangs a pendulum, installed in 1931 when the cathedral was used as the state anti-religious museum. The museum has now been disbanded. Behind St. Isaac's Cathedral in Decembrist Square is one of Russia's most unforgettable monuments, the Bronze Horseman, a memorial to Peter the Great, founder of the city. Leningrad's most celebrated street is the Nevsky Prospect, at one time the most fashionable address in the city, and now an important shopping thoroughfare. The broad street with its handsome, even facades was once home to the likes of Tchaikovsky and Nijinsky, and to the renowned Russian jewelry shop Fabergé. The Cathedral of Our Lady of Kazan, the biggest church on the avenue, has been turned into a museum of the history of religion and atheism, with exhibits that attempt to disprove famous religious miracles. But as with so many religious buildings in the USSR, the beauty and peacefulness of the church remain undisturbed. In the vicinity stands a towering statue of Catherine the Great, shown with her political associates grouped at her feet. In neighboring Ostrovsky Square is the Pushkin Theater, home of Russia's oldest dramatic company, tracing its roots back to 1756. Behind the theater is an exquisite street. Named for its architect, Carlo Rossi, the effect of this boulevard is one of formal perfection. There are many reminders of Lenin here in his namesake city, the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution. Life-sized statues are seen throughout the city. This is the Smolny Institute, now one of the most famous buildings in Soviet history. It was from here in 1917 that Trotsky and the Bolsheviks led the first insurrections against the provisional government. On the night of October 24th, Lenin came to the Smolny Institute and took command of the uprising. It is that night which is celebrated as the birth of the Soviet Union. On the river, one can actually climb aboard the cruiser Aurora. It was her gun that fired the signal for the first Bolshevik assault on the Winter Palace. Despite the cruiser's age, the Soviet Navy maintains a full crew on board. Such is the respect accorded this rather humble gunboat. Like most landmarks of the Revolution, the Aurora attracts school children and tourists alike. A pleasant place to take a break in Leningrad is in the summer gardens. Laid out in formal patterns by Peter I in 1704, the gardens fell into disrepair over the years and today have evolved into a relaxed, landscaped park. Nearby is the Summer Palace, the first proper royal residence in St. Petersburg, completed in 1712. In the northeastern section of the city is a reminder of the terrible price paid by the Soviets during World War II. Here in Piskarevsky Cemetery lie 470,000 of the 1 million who died, mainly of starvation, during the Nazis' 2.5-year siege of Leningrad. From September 1941 until January 1944, the Germans bombarded and blockaded the city. Bombs fell on the Admiralty, the Winter Palace, and other landmarks. During the first winter, there was no fuel, no running water, no trams or buses. But as the monuments here tell, despite hundreds of thousands of deaths, the city would not fall. The rest of the country rallied with supplies. Factories worked around the clock, and architects, sculptors, and builders rescued the city's art treasures. Leningrad held. The city recovered remarkably, and its world-class cultural institutions survived and thrive again today. Now this is the Kirov Theater, home of the Kirov Ballet. Anna Pavlova danced here, as did Rudolf Nureyev, Natalia Makarova, and Mikhail Baryshnikov. The current core of artists continue to perform the timeless classics of the repertoire. Nightlife in the Soviet Union ends early. One must usually choose between eating a leisurely meal out or attending a performance. Occasionally the two are combined, though, as in this floor show offered at Leningrad's restaurant Troika. Here, the chef shatters the stereotype that Russian food must be heavy and boring.
Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья! Я вас приветствую в ресторане «Тройка», одним из лучших ресторанов города Ленинграда и всего Советского Союза. Мне хочется познакомить вас с некоторыми особенностями русской национальной кухни, а также с теми продуктами и блюдами, которые пользуются особой популярностью у нас и у наших зарубежных гостей. Перед вами находятся те основные продукты, которыми мы пользуемся. В частности, это ягоды, клюква, брусника, грибы, свинина. И один из самых любимых продуктов русскими людьми – это осетрина, так называемая красная рыба. Мы счастливы и рады видеть вас в нашем ресторане. Вы всегда будете самыми дорогими гостями у нас, в нашем предприятии.
Even in the winter, the best Leningrad restaurants can get fresh fruit and vegetables from the temperate republics in the south. And though it's not a bargain anymore, Caviar is a treat at any price. The pleasures of a cultured city have long made Leningrad a favorite among artists, composers, and intellectuals. The old customs house is now a literary museum, with tributes to the giants of Russian literature who lived and wrote in Leningrad: Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and here Pushkin, who is especially honored because he was the first Russian to set world-class standards in almost every genre: fiction, plays, and poetry. Pushkin is also the name of one of the lavish palaces outside the city, built as seasonal retreats for the Tsar and his court. At Pushkin, even common folk can now walk through the corridors and statuary gardens and conjure up the life of an 18th century aristocrat. Buildings that would look gaudy in the strong light of Paris or Rome take on a pastel quality in Leningrad's northern light. The profusion of color continues inside and is a hallmark of the principal designer Rastelli, who was also responsible for much of the Winter Palace. Even more extravagant is the Palace of Pietro Dvorets, where 12 miles of waterfalls and fountains operate just as they did in 1721, without any pumps. Commissioned by Peter the Great to rival Versailles, the palace was left nearly in ruins by the Germans in World War II. The Russians' love of their heritage outweighed even their scorn for the Tsars, and the palace was meticulously restored right down to the unpredictable sprinklers that douse unsuspecting tourists. A lavish palace in the heart of communism, a typically Russian paradox. Visitors to Moscow and Leningrad, those mysterious meeting points of Europe and Asia, will surely come away with their own list of ironic discoveries. The Russians themselves admit to the contradictions of their vast land. One poet writes, "Wretched and abundant, oppressed and powerful, weak and mighty, Mother Russia." But another poet describes a different feeling, one which stays with the visitor long after the views of the Kremlin and the River Neva have faded into memory. Like first love, the heart of Russia will not forget you.
World travel. Filled with action, excitement, and adventure. International Video Network's video visits are your ticket to the world. These exciting video programs will whisk you away to more than 50 fascinating destinations on 6 continents. Breathtaking photography heightens the beauty and grandeur of the world's greatest cities and countries. Entertaining as well as informative, video visits are a great way to relive memorable vacations, plan your next trip, or just to satisfy your curiosity of exotic locales. From the pulsating sounds of Carnival in Rio to the peaceful serenity of Ireland's countryside, each video visit will transport you to the actual location. Video visits also feature authentic ethnic music providing insights into the different cultures of the world. Whether it be an Irish colleen singing a traditional folk song, or the boisterous Oktoberfest in Munich, you'll examine the people of today's ever-changing world, discovering the similarities and differences that makes each of them unique, from the native Eskimos of Alaska to the Buddhist monks of China. Bring the world into your home by visiting such sites as all these and many more exciting destinations are waiting to be discovered by you now. Also available is the Reader's Digest Great National Park Series, Yosemite, Yellowstone, and the Grand Canyon. Crown jewels of America's national park system are available for your viewing pleasure. To start or expand your video travel library, order Video Visits or the Great National Park Series from your favorite retailer, mail order catalog, or by calling International Video Network at 415-866-1121 for the name of a distributor near you.